Today's episode of Surfing the Quicksand, we're going to talk about the student at home and what parents might have in mind when it comes to setting students up for success. Some of that's around organizing, and some of that's about productivity, and some of that is about communication, and all of it can be stressful. I'm bringing in today an expert who I love talking to, who's a combination of an educator and an organizer. And she works with helping families and students and parents all achieve with that goal of bringing out the best in their students at home. Welcome to Surfing the Quicksand. I'm your host, Kathy Vine. One of the things you may not know about me is I come from a family of educators and educated minded people. And so the idea of the home really being a focus for how students and children learn was something that I really always grew up with. And I think I kind of took it for granted that maybe just parents know how to do that all the time and how to make the home environment really aligned with learning purposes. I wanted to bring on somebody that I've known for many years to talk about that because her expertise is very unique. She has threaded the needle between her background as a public educator and also her love and passion for organizing and productivity. And she brings those together to work with students and parents and families to help them be more organized and productive as they're thinking about bringing out the best in their students' life and achievement. She is one of my froligs. You've heard me use that term, friend plus colleague from the National Association of Productivity and Organizing Professionals, NAPO. She's also a founder of the National Association of Black Professional Organizing, NABPO. And she has this mini cohort of other Black professional organizers in the Atlanta area, which is where she's from, called Ebony and Orderly. And they do a ton of work and doing summits and really trying to bring not only brightness to people's lives and organizing, but also really encouraging this environment of Black professional organizers to continue to thrive. And I've been a big supporter of this organization since pretty much their founding. And I'm really proud of that. And I love that it also got me to be friends with Tiffany Blassingame, owner of Simple Organization. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Kathy. I'm super excited to share today.
I also want to mention that you are, in addition to all of this, your kind of full-time job is you are a founder and the administrator of a micro school in Atlanta. So really even bringing education up higher, you decided you wanted to bring education with a very specific charter and purpose to life by like creating a whole school. So I'm thrilled that you're carving out time in the middle of all of those things to talk with us today about how parents can think about their home and whether it's their stuff, their systems, their habits, which is what I always talk about when I'm working with people in organizing, how all of this can be aligned for supporting their students' goals. So, can we start with talking about your story and how you went from kind of public educator to organizer first?
Yes, yeah. Like most organizers, I've always been organized, right? Like I'm the one that in every little group that I may have had, I was putting things together. I'll be the one to plan the trip or to do the things, right? Um, and so although my full-time work I knew was always around education, I'm a fourth generation educator. So my mom, my grandma, and my great grandma were all educators. And so I just grew up around that space, the way you described it. Um, and so I just kind of began to learn so much more over the past maybe 15 years just around executive function, neuroscience, what that looks like for children. And that's what led me to begin to implement that in my classroom, implement that in my own home with my son, and then wanting to share it with anyone who would listen and wanted help and support with what it looks like to support your child's growing skills that they're going to need for life. And it's often was not about just the math or just the reading. It was also about those academic life skills that they needed to complete work, to complete tasks at home, and to juggle all of the demands that they have, extracurricular activities, activities that you also, want them to do and be involved in, along with the demands of school or homeschooling. And so that's how I got here.
I love the term academic life coach.
Mhm.
And because it's an interesting combination, like we can kind of think about what life coaching is, and we can kind of think
Mhm.
about what academic coaching is. But to
Mhm.
the way I'm hearing you talk about it is really synthesizing that a student has a very broad and rich life, and some of that is around the class and the homework and the getting work done, but it's also around balancing so many other things that they want to do, that you want them to do,
Right.
being able to kind of initiate those tasks and complete those tasks. Talk more about when you're introducing the concept of academic life coaching. What do you think is the full, like a full palette of that parents learn and are surprised about?
Yeah, I think the first part is getting them to understand what type of academic life they have created for their child, right? So if it's, talking to the homeschool family, it's different than talking to the public school family or the private school family, right? Like their mindsets around what they have chosen for their child, for how they want them to experience education lends itself to now, if this is what your goal is for your child, if this is the direction you're going, let's look at what some of those demands are outside of the content areas, right? And alongside that, what type of child do you have, right? Do you have a child that's in a non-traditional homeschooling environment because they're an actress or an actor? Do you have an athlete? Do you have a STEM kid? Do you have a kid that really doesn't want to do anything else but what they have to do, right?
My bare
And
minimum kid, right? I always
right,
contemplate.
that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Hmm.
So thinking about who the child is, what the environment is that you have placed them in, and now let's look at what are all the things that surround that,
Mm.
right? We can talk about doing a launch pad to get out the door, but if you're not going out the door because you're homeschooling, then how do you get that task initiation started in the morning? What does your routine look like in the morning? Or do you need to get out the door first and go for a walk and come back so that it kind of jump starts that day for the kid, right? And so those type of things, it's like really getting to know the family and what they've set themselves up for so that we can move forward to how to support the kid.
You know, what comes to mind for me is first of all, as you and I both know really well, the people who hire us are people who need us, right? So
Mhm.
they need us because they're struggling, because they've been trying to do it on their own, because they don't know the right pathway, right? So we are problem solvers when people get to that point where they not only need somebody, but they're willing to invest money to get our help. And what comes to mind for me is the idea that parents might not be acknowledging that their kid is who their kid is, and they very much want a different kind of academic or performance or productivity experience that goes counter against how they're wired.
Listen, I always say, parent the child you have. You you've got to get to know the kid, and that's who the kid is. Parent that child, not who you wish they were, what you wanted things to be, how you envisioned it. Parent the child you have.
I think I come up with it most often when I'm working with families, and I do work with kids. I don't work with them on study skills and things like that. I love helping kids who are in kind of transition years who they want to work on their bedrooms, right?
Yes.
And I've got a whole I love I love working with the kids. I love it when parents are observers. I love it when parents aren't observers and they come back and say, I don't understand how we did this. I've been trying for years for this to this. But one of the things is really I tell the parents before I work with them, I'm going to ask questions of your kids that you've never even thought were questions that could be asked, right?
Mhm.
You designed their bedroom with your brain in mind. You
Right.
put their desk thinking that that's how you did homework when you were growing
Mhm.
up, right?
Mhm.
All of these ideas of how a parent brings their own assumptions or blind spots into creating the environment for their kid based on their own, like genuine, authentic experience, right? It's not
Right.
like they're forcing something. They're just like, well, this worked for me. This worked for their
Right.
father, right? Why wouldn't this work here? So
Mhm.
I love the idea that when I work with a child and parents are in earshot, they're like, I had no idea that that's how they felt, or I had no idea that they paid attention to
Mhm.
that. And so the honor that we have to help families better communicate with each other, better understand each other, to unlock some things that help their environment, I think is such a gift.
Yes, and I also think that the child's responses to the parent are based on what they think the parent wants to hear. And so then they don't really get anywhere, right?
Yeah.
Because the parent then continues to do what they have envisioned. Um, and
Can
so
you
it's
get
different
give
when
some
they're working
examples of
together.
that? Give some
Um,
examples of that.
yeah, so you kind of talked about like when you walk in, and you have the questions that you have for kids when you're working in the bedroom, right? Or any space. And they begin to think for themselves about what it is that they want versus when the parent asks them those questions, they want to please please the parent. And so for me, I also tell the parent that the student is my client, not you. And so we're going to work this out between the two of us with your support and guidance and give it a try. So sometimes the parents, see the way that the child has thought and they're like, well, that seems chaotic to me. Well, let that child give it a try. We can always change some things, but allow them the independence of thinking for themselves and doing it on their own because they need to be able to see that they are capable of doing that. And I feel like that's sometimes a struggle with parents and kids in this space is allowing them just the opportunity to figure it out on their own. It's the same thing with how they may want to organize their papers, their assignments, even from the days that they want to get things done. Like the child says they want to get it done on a Thursday, and they're like, "Well, I want them to do it on Tuesday because," and I'm like, "Well, they're saying that Thursday is the day that they feel like they have the most time to do it, and they want to work on it. Let's give it a try. Let them try it their way." Because I often see where a child hasn't had that freedom to choose, oftentimes.
As you're describing, we might use the word agency, right? That ability to say, I have a choice here, or I'd like to have a choice here in determining what I understand I'm going to have to do homework, right? I don't have agency over whether or not I do homework, but maybe I have agency in terms of when I do it. And
Mhm.
then being able to say, how do we empower the student to discover that
Mhm.
what the right answer is for them, right? Thursday might sound good, and let's build a plan around Thursday. And now we're 3 Thursdays into this plan and it's not working. Okay, well,
Right,
now it's a different conversation.
right. And allowing them that opportunity, if it's not working, to understand how to have that flexible thinking and to change it. And you want them to do that while they're still under your roof, be and figure out, how to make changes and to pivot when needed before they have to go out on their own and it's a shock to them and they don't know how to get back on track.
I absolutely I hear what you're talking about and I'm getting back to kind of that term of academic life coaching, right? Now we're talking about real life coaching, like for after you leave the academic environment or after you leave the home
Mhm.
sponsored academic and you go somewhere else. Do your students have they built up the ability to analyze their situation, to evaluate if it's working or not, to reach out for help if they need it, to pivot and
Right.
pilot? That work doesn't happen spontaneously at 18 just because they went away to college.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't happen at 21 or 25.
Nope. I want to go back. You talked about that really important principle, right? Which is the student is my client, not the parents. How when you're working with a family and parents are bringing you in, when you're working with a family, how do you go through the process of establishing goals around what your work together might include?
I first start with just talking with the parent about their goals. Like, why did you reach out? What's happening? Like, more of that kind of intake consultation time. And I never start with a family without meeting the child first. And so next is meeting the child and asking them, you know, how they feel about it, what goals do they have? Because I also want to fill out whether or not the child is going to be willing to do the work. Because sometimes they just may not be ready yet, or the work needs to look different based on that child's needs. And that could be whether or not they have like some cognitive differences, some learning differences, things like that, that maybe the parent knew about and shared, or maybe they do not, and it's an undiagnosed area where that's something else that comes up that we begin to talk about. But after that, getting started, with the child means like telling the parent, like, this is what I observe in the child. This is what the goals you have set for them. This is how I think we could work together. And then once we start working together, I do give executive function kind of questionnaire to see what areas are strengths for the child, and then what areas are areas where we need to kind of work on, and talking with that child about what executive function skills are. And then next, talking with the parent about, like, this is what showed up. This is how we're going to actually implement the goals that you have based on the child that you have. So we talked about, parent the child you have. I'm going to work with the child that you have, right? And so that looks different for each kid. But our focus is really always around executive function, even if it's whether it's organizing the bedroom, whether it's setting up a study space, whether it's checking in each week. Let's pull up your student information system from your school, where your assignments, great, you turn these things in. Did you recognize that the teacher sent you an email here and said, turn this in, and you haven't yet? It's like big with a big red exclamation mark. You just skipped over that. So making sure that they have a plan for the things that they are expected to do. Sometimes it's around emotional regulation. I make myself available to students where they can, text me if they need something. I may text them and say, like, good luck on your math test tomorrow. I know you studied really hard. Being able to kind of reach them in a way that's not seen as I'm someone that's telling them to do something yet again. I'm just like the cheerleader, the coach on the side, saying you can do it. I can't do it for you, but I know you can do it. And here's our game plan.
You talked a lot about executive function in there, and you mentioned some things, organizing and planning. Like there are a number of different aspects of executive function. And something that comes to mind for me is I often think about parents might hire an executive functioning coach, executive function coach for a kid they already know has ADHD, is struggling with executive function, some aspect. But even kids who are not neurodiverse can struggle because some of this is skill, right? It isn't like, oh, I have good executive function, therefore I know how to manage my time innately and intuitively. Some of this really also feels like skill building for everyone.
Absolutely. Well, and when we look at that research, we know that kids starting in the middle school age, um, they have the same need for executive function support that they did when they were toddlers. And so when you're toddlers, when they're toddlers, you talk to them about having that tantrum, right? You think about that middle schooler slamming that door. But you talk to them about putting things away. You give them, you help them with their time management. Like, okay, like we're gonna leave grandma's in 5 minutes. All right. You might even set a timer at grandma's because you know it's time to leave grandma and then it's gonna be all over the place. Same thing with your middle schoolers. Might not be leaving grandma, or it could be. Or it could be, I'm going to pick you up from the game at this time, or all those things. And so I tell parents that the same way that you were understanding and patient with helping that toddler to understand how to navigate getting older in life, that's the same thing that's happening with that middle schooler. And oftentimes, when we don't do that for our middle schoolers, when we don't support them in that way, then they get into high school and they don't know how to manage all of the different skills that they need for being successful.
Yeah, everything just gets so much more complex at high school. Not that middle school isn't complex, right? For sure it is. But everything gets so much more complex, and your ability to kind of scaffold and support
Right.
really gets compromised when there's so much more pressure and constraints and emotions that's been a bit more out of control, I think, once you get into high school, as we think about anxiety being so much more prevalent, I think, in high schoolers. And I think that's something that we've seen not just since the pandemic, but for sure that's where a lot of the focus has been. What are the things that parents can even do at that point in time must feel really limiting.
Absolutely. And I think the comparison in high school, right? Like if they don't know who they are as a student and what works for them, then they begin to compare themselves to others. Well, they're naturally comparing themselves to others, but now they're comparing that part of their life to others. So and so doesn't get upset when XYZ happens, but I can't seem to control myself when I get upset, right?
Mm.
Or so and so always remembers to turn this in, but I can't remember to do that. And understanding that, this kid over here, their areas of growth is something different than yours. You focus on what it is that you want to work on and become confident in the systems and strategies and tools that you have. And I believe that that's a lot of what the kids are going through, and that's kind of what they talk about in the sessions is like, why can't I do this, or so and so does something this way and I tried to do it that way and but the parents have no idea that they are comparing themselves in this way to other kids. Like they're just thinking that it's something going on with their kid. um
And I would bet that even the students who are going through that don't realize that that can be all consuming, right? Just
mhm,
this is just what's going on in their brain, and they might not recognize, like, listen, the fact that you're doing so much comparison to others, and you're finding that you fall short in so many ways, or you're feeling that you feel short in so many ways, like that's not how we want you going through life. Right.
right.
That's not what we want for you. We get it that it feels really natural. But the idea of saying, oh, how do we slow that part down? How do we help you focus back on, first of all, focus back on your strengths? Like,
Right.
can we understand? Can you appreciate what your strengths are rather
Mhm,
than just focusing on the gaps?
mhm.
And then how do we build off of those strengths is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. And oftentimes, if I have a child that is particularly anxious around that type of comparison talk, after we do the assessment, we do like a vision boarding exercise, either a mini vision board or a bigger one. It depends on how creative the kid is. Sometimes the vision board just goes too far, but love to see it. But this is who how I want to show up as a student, um, and paying close attention to putting, because for me the vision board isn't always about what I want to be or to do, but also who I already am. And so finding visions of yourself that already exist and placing that on the board alongside um, things that you strive to be able to do.
I love that. And I think, I've done a vision board here and there, in my life, but never with the idea of still reflecting who I am and bringing those strengths forward with me. I really love that.
Yeah.
I want to talk about like some basics, right? So if you're talking to parents about what you want them to keep in mind, and I know you work with elementary school kids and middle school kids and things like that. Let's first start about the physical environment. What are some things that you're paying attention to and asking about and hoping to improve on a typical basis?
With the physical environment, I'm looking at where are all the things that the child needs. So if I walk into a home and their shoes are in the bathroom because they got home to use the restroom, put the shoes in there, took the shoes off. I don't know. And their things to get ready to go out the door are still upstairs. That so they always every day have to bring them down to go out the door, and then when they come back home, they got to take them back upstairs. And I'm thinking, well, if this what they need to go out the door every day, let's put that near the door. So I'm looking at like where things are that the child needs. Oftentimes, I'll have the student walk me through what happens when they leave, if they're leaving out, or when they come um, home, either one or both. If they're a child that stays home for schooling, I'm like, show me where you work. No judgment on where they work. If they work better in the bed, okay. If they work better on outside in the sunroom, that's fine. But are the things that you need where for your work actually there? Or do you each time do you have to gather things together to do that? And then also talking with the parents about putting things away doesn't necessarily have to be putting it back in their room. Because if you all do school at the and homework at the dining room table, then let's set up a system where we could put things away, but in a little basket or little drawer system where things can be put away so then now you can eat on the table. But having them go upstairs and come back down and do all of that wastes time, allows them to get distracted,
Mhm.
and it takes longer to get started and then to finish.
Yeah.
So for the physical space, I'm just kind of following that child and figuring out what they need and where those things are housed so that we can make it a more efficient kind of system for work.
I really appreciate, and I am a systems thinker. So being able to say, all right, I don't want you to just tell me what you do when you get home from school. I want to watch you and I want to follow you and I want to notice and observe things that maybe you're not noticing.
Mhm.
When I work in bedrooms, one of my favorite things to say, I just worked with a kiddo recently, whereas like, kiddo's a big reader. So like the stack of books next to the bed, even though they're not reading all of them right now. Like, oh, okay, how are we? You clearly you're craving next to bed,
Mhm.
holding a book. So, like, how do we make that work? Like,
Right.
do you need a different piece of furniture to go with your style? Do we need to have a bookshelf? Like, is the problem that your bookshelves aren't working for you? And really being able, again, kind of looking at the environment and the flow of how you interact with it as a system, and really being able to see, like, what are your priorities, because
Right.
how you're living is showing up there, and what are the things you're stumbling over every day. I love hearing the idea of, like, if we think putting it away means go, hey, every day you put it back in your bedroom and every day you bring it back, that really can be a recipe for failure for even the most organized kid.
Right. Right. And I always ask parents, is that what you do with your work? Right? Is do you take your work and put it in your in your bedroom and then bring it back out?
Yeah.
Like we often say, keep work out of the bedroom, right? That's what people say.
Yeah.
But yet we want the kids to make their bedroom only a space for
Yeah.
just only their things all the time, you know.
So we talked a little bit about physical. Now let's talk about kind of that time management, right? So what are you asking about? What are you working with families most typically when you're focusing on kind of the time management of short and long-term planning?
Um, for my older students, we do more of like a time audit, time budget, looking at, each day because their schedules change oftentimes throughout the day. Like if they have football practice early in the morning, and afternoon, but certain days they don't have the practice. Like let's look at where you have time to do certain things. And that goes back to all of the demands that kids may have. And then we take that time and say, okay, like we've noticed that Tuesdays you have a more white space. So each week, the things that you may have a long-term project to do, you may maybe you're getting ready to start writing college essays or looking at colleges. That Tuesday seems to be a good day where you can dive into some of that with a clearer kind of mind and space. And the rest of the days, you're just trying to fit in, when's going to be your homework time to get it done before the next day. Like with the type of schedule you have, you can't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to get the homework done in the morning before school because you got to be on the field at 6:30. So it's just not a thing. So how do you like help them manage that time? And then we make like basically we do that time budget, make like an ideal kind of schedule, and that's what stays up as a reminder of things to do during that white space time. Um, and that's how I start with those older kids. For the younger ones, like fourth grade to sixth grade, we might just take one day and do like a 24-hour time wheel and help them to notice that really you only have about 3 hours a day that belong to you. By the time we've done school, how many hours you're in school, have your sleep, eating, morning, afternoon, your commute to and from school, your homework time. Like, so you really can't keep asking mom for a play date because every day, because you don't have but 2 hours. All right, so that's not going to happen. But helping them to realize that like time is a fixed thing. You only
Yeah.
have this number of hours.
It's interesting. In both examples, what I really like about it is you're turning the concept of time and turning it into something physical and that they can look at, they can interact with, they can measure, they can observe, right? So even just talking about white space, right? We're talking about what we mean is it's white space on the calendar because we put everything else in and it's a different color and
Mhm.
white is empty. So being able to train the brain of saying white space is a thing I can see in my life. And I know that that's my opportunity to fill it in with something I need to do, something I want to do, that sort of thing. Or turning it into like a time wheel, saying, all right, here's your 24 hours. What really feels real to you? Because I do know that the concept of time for some people, um, neurodiverse and non-neurodiverse, the concept of time is really difficult to manage and budget, as you talked about, and figure out, are you spending it poorly or are you wasting it? It really
Right.
seems like that seems like a core piece of learning, is that help in the time management is just helping people see their time.
Right. Right. And in so many different ways to see it and then also to feel it. Like, we're so caught into this digital world that even feeling the sweep of time, like with the analog clocks, the visual timers, like kids need that.
Yeah, we talk about that all the time, right? The analog clock is the digital clock only tells you what time it is, not how much time you have left or how much time has been passed. It's just a snapshot. Whereas an analog
Right.
clock, if you learn how to tell the time on an analog clock,
Mhm.
really can help you with a glance kind of figure out a little bit more the passage of time
Yeah.
or how much you have left. I also think about time. You mentioned kind of 5 more minutes before we leave grandma's, right? For a lot of students, I know that video games or doom scrolling, Instagram and Snapchat and things like that, right? By the way, so do adults. But that whole concept of how much we can lose track of time, or quite frankly, we're engaged in activities that we can't just be like, oh, the alarm went off, I'm done. Right?
Yeah.
That transition time. How do you
Right.
talk about those concepts with students?
I think that's the most challenging, um, is getting them to understand what that is because it's all that they have grown up with, right? It's not like for us, we knew a time where we didn't have that. And then so we have something to refer to. Like, I really spend a lot of time doing this, and I know before I did not. For them, they've always had access to these platforms and devices and things like that. So I start with just notifications. Like if we can stop you getting notifications for every single thing, then that at least doesn't pull you in as much. Um, and then helping them to realize that if they want to have some time on their devices, that they have to figure out a way to set boundaries for themselves. So whether that is setting a timer, which they don't want to do, that seems very limiting, right? Um, or I always say, well, can you at least when you start, say, oh, what time did I start doing this? And then, try to remind yourself to look again to see how long you have been on that. Um, or if you have the urge, let's say, to go to the restroom, then when you go to the restroom, say, okay, I'm not going to get back on it. Like that was a natural break. Like use natural breaks.
Mm.
Or I'm going to go downstairs and get some water really quick. Get the water and don't get back on there. So trying to use those natural breaks. But the most success I've had with kids has been with turning off the notifications. They have notifications for everything. They just feel like they need to be connected to the ESPN notification, the YouTube, the Snapchat, all of the things. And it's this constant need to just feel connected to the world and everybody in it. I'm going to miss something. And, it feels odd the first few days, but then they begin to get used to it, and realize their dependence that they've built on just knowing what's happening all the time.
Yeah. And I think about uh the kind of the video games, the Snapchat, the social digital interactions. And for a lot of people, right, this is their social life, right? Their kids aren't going,
Mhm.
we're not doing what we did when we grew up. And
Right,
and I remember thinking like, oh, when I was growing up, of course I had social time. I was on the telephone. And believe me, I could have talked on the telephone all day and I had, all my friends. But no phone calls after 9 o'clock, right?
right,
There was a rule, and the rule was followed because my mother would pick up the phone and say, Catherine, it's 9 o'clock, get a phone. Right. So we had social connection that was time bound because we didn't have the full 24 access and the global access that they do now. So the idea of saying like, oh, well, I don't, it's their social time. These are how this is what all their friends do. Like, yeah, but like it was what we had too, but it was time bound or location bound. So for
Right.
us, it's so much harder to even envision and
Right.
experience what you're talking about, that need for connection and that deep fear of missing out on what other people are doing. And even going back to what you talked about before about kids naturally comparing themselves to others, there is such an external view that is driving so much for kids today.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I even remember when my son was in middle school, early high school years, um, he just was not allowed to have the phone or the device in his room when it was bedtime. Like they had to go somewhere else, and including the game controllers,
Yeah.
because they wake up and they're just like, "Oh, I don't have anything to do. Let me just get up and play the game." And then they've been playing the game for hours. They fall asleep an hour before time to get ready. And as a parent, like I found it helpful to take those devices, keep them in my room, not even like put them somewhere else because and it's not because they're bad kids. They have this gravitation toward these things,
Yeah.
and like you have to like find a way to control it. Like you said, your mom was like, "Catherine, get off the
Yeah.
phone,"
I worked with a family middle school boy, yeah, seventh grade, last fall, and we had the conversation about the devices, and also has a smartwatch, right? And
Mhm.
so the answer, the one of the points of resistance was, well, that's where their alarm is. They set their alarm on their phone or they set their alarm on the watch. And of course, I said, that's great. I totally get that. Do you have $12? Because Amazon has an alarm clock that's not attached to the internet, right? Like
Mhm.
we we're so even we in our own using lives, we're so kind of bought into the efficiency and
Right.
kind of the enhancements that digital life brings us that we're like, but how could I possibly how can I let go of my watch or my phone? That's my alarm. I won't wake up. We've forgotten that we can go a little bit more, in this case, analog, even if it's a digital clock,
Mhm.
and get to like, well, what's the problem we're trying to solve? You want
Right.
your child to wake up in the morning. Okay, we can get an alarm. And you want
Mhm.
your child to sleep at night. Okay, get the devices out. So how can we achieve both of those?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tiffany, I really enjoy this. And, I think people know that I don't have kids. So the fact that I can't speak from first person knowledge as a mom, I'm so always appreciative when I bring experts on who can do that. You're talking as a mom, as you just mentioned, as well as your deep experience as an educator and an organizer. I'm so grateful for you. I want to switch over to the Quicksand 3, which is the 3 questions I ask all of my guests. So the first is, what is a tip or technique that you use to get yourself motivated to do something you've been avoiding?
So this was the one that was the hardest for me to think through. But the tip that I use is I know what my peak times are. And so if it's something that's really I need to get started on, and I know I've been avoiding it, I will schedule that thing during my peak times. So if it's and I have peak times for different things, right? So if it's like cleaning off the kitchen counter, my peak time, like kitchen cleaning wise, is like 10 to 12. So I'll wake up in the morning, have a slow morning, go for a walk, and then I'll just come in and just tackle it. But if I try to say, oh, I'll get to that in the evening time or after work, it's just gonna stay that way. So recognizing my peak time.
I love
And
that. And I talk about kind of that energy, understanding your energy flow when I work with productivity is don't, if you have to do work that really requires a lot of brain attention and creativity, you can't expect that you're going to do good work or get started at all if you're putting on your calendar during a time that's kind of low energy time. Super,
Right,
super smart.
right.
Second, if skills and money and location and time and history were not an issue, what is a career or job you might have liked to try?
I would have been a flight attendant.
I love
I
that.
want to get on those planes and just go different places. And I want to like walk and serve people. And that's just, I love it.
Oh my gosh, I'm picturing you're like air hostess, right? Like, hi, welcome to Tiffany's plane. What
Yes,
can I
I
get
want to
you?
get on the little intercom thingy and like, hi, welcome to Delta. We're so happy to have you here. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And then finally, what's a way when life gets chaotic that you recharge or hit the reset button?
So we've spoken about this before. I love the Korean bath saunas. Um, yeah, it's not for everyone, but
Explain what that is, for some people might not know what that is.
okay, so they are little kind of spa places, let's say that. They're not always little though. Some are really huge. They're you see them a lot in South Korea. They're like on every corner there. And you go inside. It's a nice, relaxing environment. They usually have hot tubs. They have oftentimes dry saunas that have certain properties, minerals and properties. So there might be a salt sauna, there may be an oxygen sauna, there may be a charcoal sauna, and you just kind of and walk around. You put on their little relaxing outfits, and you're just relaxing. But it is not it's not your typical spa where you like someone's they're trying to serve you or make you relax. Like it is up to you to feel that downtime. And once I get a day there, I mean, it's really like you just pay like an admission fee, like $35, and you can stay there like 24 hours. Now, I have not stayed 24 hours, but I have gotten up to like 14 one time. Like you just, yeah. And so I find, and what is offering me is the spacing, right? Because if I keep, I'm one, I'll overthink it, I'll keep it in my head, and then I'm just stuck in that. But if I step away from it, um, and come back, that's when I'm like really, really stuck with something. That's usually like doing my taxes. Okay. I have to first go to the sauna.
Well, I love that
Get that done.
it's not such it's not only I'm in a relaxing environment and things like that, but it's like I've gotten myself physically away from the environment I'm stuck in. Like I'm mentally
Yeah.
stuck in. I have to put myself somewhere, and you've found a place that really kind of suits what you like for your brain and for your body. That's so
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Good,
Because
good.
I feel like I hold that in my body.
Yeah.
But also, and I didn't mention this, there's limited device usage. So that's what does
Yes.
it,
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
separate yourself from
Yeah.
the outside of that space.
So this is called a Korean spa. If somebody wants to look at it, look for this kind of
Korean
thing
spa, a
in there.
Korean
Yeah.
sauna,
Okay.
Korean bathhouse.
All
Yeah.
right. I love it. Good. Thank you. Tiffany, if people want to learn more about you or your services or how to follow all the things that you talk about all the time, uh, what should they know?
I'd love for you to follow me on LinkedIn. That's where I have best been able to kind of put both my education hat and my organizing hat all together. So I'm happy to help support families and students to really create a more organized approach to home work and school. And I'm also happy to help families to figure out what works best for their child in the education space as well. And so LinkedIn is the best place to find me.
Great. I'll put your LinkedIn handle and profile in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on here with me. I so enjoyed this conversation. I've learned things, and I'm sure everybody listening and watching are very much learning as well.
Thanks so much for having me, Kathy. This has been great.
I think one of the things I really enjoyed about talking with Tiffany is this idea that probably every parent and every student can spend more time thinking about how to look at their environment, how to look at their routines, how to think about their time and their tasks, and really explore, is it building the skills that you're hoping for in those students so that that only gets stronger when you're not there to help support and scaffold all of that work. Really such a fun kind of conversation around knowing that the kid you had as a toddler is still the kid you have as a middle schooler, is still the kid that you have at 21 or 25, and how evolving as a parent to say, how do I continue to reinforce where I know we see gaps and where I know we have strengths to build that resilience and build that agency for independence later on. Really, just I hope you got something out of this conversation if you're a parent. And even if you're not a parent, I hope you learned a bit about kind of family dynamics and kids because I know I did. Thanks for being here.